All right. Took me a little longer to get here than I anticipated, but I am finally here for Wednesday Wisdom with yours truly, Mazi Mutafa. Most people think starting a nonprofit is complicated and expensive, but the truth is it's just a checklist. What some people call an administrative burden is actually the same toolkit that you can turn that you can that you can use to turn your ideas into a multi-thousand or a multi-million dollar organization. Today's going to be a show where we show how simple it really is for you to go from idea to legal nonprofit step by step. Welcome to episode 8 of Wednesday Wisdom. It's yours truly, Mazi Mutafa. Proceed at your own risk. Um, Over the next 30 or so minutes, I'm here offering what doing has taught me. This show is about engaging peers and community members in conversations that help us change the world for the better. So, before we dive in, please subscribe and like. So, today I want to talk about something people have been telling me for years, and it's about this thing called an administrative burden of starting a nonprofit and how overwhelming it is. I want to tell you that it's nowhere near as complicated as you think. Uh, you could really break down the administrative burden to maybe 7 things: the formation and legal compliance, ongoing reporting and filing, financial management and oversight, fundraising and donor relations, government and human resources, program and impact accountability. And you could probably even add in there public scrutiny and transparency. I want to, for the next 30 minutes, talk about the first three: the formation and legal compliance, ongoing reporting and filing, and financial management and oversight. And I want to talk about these because they're really the foundation of building a business in the nonprofit context. And they're really far more simple than you might imagine. So, what is the very first step that you need to undertake to create a nonprofit? I'll be honest, when I started 23 years ago, I had no idea. And then I did just a little bit of research and discovered that the very first thing you need to do is, if you're creating a business, to get its employee identification number. You could think of it as your business's social security number. It will be the easiest step in this whole process because literally all you have to do is use whatever search engine you currently use and type in the phrase, how do I get an EIN? And there's going to be a bunch of different answers to that question that come up. Look for the one that is the IRS, because there's a bunch of basically scam paid services that say that they can get you an EIN. You don't need to pay anybody to get an EIN. It's literally a phone call, a visit to a website, and you can have it the same day. You can get your business's social security number, your EIN, your employment identification number the same day. This is the very first step. The next thing you're going to need to do is actually create articles of incorporation. You're like, Mazi, what are articles of incorporation? The internet is your friend. You can literally use whatever search engine you use to look for sample articles of incorporation for businesses in your city. Each city has different requirements, so you want to make sure that the articles of incorporation that you're pulling from are compliant with the requirements for your city or state. As an example, in Washington, D.C., in order to file articles of incorporation, you need to have a board of directors of at least 3 people. So if you want to start the thing, but you don't have anybody who wants to see you start it and wants to join your board, you need to find some people. You got to tell a story. You got to do that first bit of growing the community that's invested in the thing that you want to do. So you got to find out what is the minimum number of people you need to have on your board of directors in order to be able to draft and file articles of incorporation. Now, there will be a fee associated with submitting your articles of incorporation. It's going to vary from state to state. You should be looking at the small business arm of your local government to figure out where it is you need to submit it. Again, use your favorite search engine and say, where do I submit my articles of incorporation for your city, your state? Super easy to find. Many people think that they need to hire a lawyer to be able to do this part of the work. You can, I mean, if you've got money and you really want to spend it, but you don't need to. You just need to make sure that your documents are in compliance. And with the use of AI or even just your favorite search engine, you can get example articles of incorporation. Now, I brought up getting the board of directors before I brought up filing the articles because you can't file the articles until you have a board of directors. But again, once you do that, you're instantly incorporated in your city, state, which is the second step. One of the things that's going to be required as a part of um, the submission of those articles of incorporation is to develop bylaws. Bylaws are the rules that you as an entity agree to operate under. It's got things in it like how often your board meets, what your staffing structure is like, um, the legal framework that you're using to build your business. Again, search engines are your friends, and so is artificial intelligence in terms of drafting bylaws that are in line, one, with legal compliance, but two, with the priorities you have as a brand new entity. You must apply for a federal tax exempt status after these things. The first step is to, again, your employment identification number, get however many board members are required in order for you to submit articles of incorporation, and then draft bylaws. You're going to need to turn all of those things in to your local government because once you're incorporated, once you have an EIN, once you have bylaws, you're officially a company. The question is, are you going to be a local company that's recognized by your local government, or are you going to be something that's recognized by the federal government? The federal government designation for nonprofits is 501c3. You want to be able to submit your paperwork to the IRS. Traditionally, the submission process for submitting the paperwork to the IRS takes somewhere between 6 and 12 months. But the beautiful thing is that the day that you submit your 501c3 paperwork, which are the 1023 or 1023EZ, you can start raising money, and people who donate to you are able to start writing those donations off immediately. It's called a good faith contribution because as long as your paperwork is in order and you've already done the work to be able to be approved in your local state, the federal government basically is kind of a rubber stamp. They just take a long time to turn around the paperwork. There's also a question that gets asked in this 1023 paperwork that trips up a lot of people. One of the questions is, how much money do you expect to raise? And I'm sure you, just like I, when you started your business or plan to start your business, you think it's going to be huge. And so there's a question. I believe the threshold is something like over $150,000 or over $500,000. Do you think you're going to raise above or below that? You need to check you're going to raise below that. Why? Because there's actually no penalty if you happen to raise more. You don't know how much money you're going to be able to raise. But when you first start a thing, especially a charity, it's going to be difficult in the beginning for you to raise money unless you are super connected to people that are wealthy or have relationships with folks that work in corporations. So you're going to know your network and the possibility of your ability to raise money better than I will. But when I filled out the paperwork, I asked the person at the IRS, is there a penalty if we raise more than the threshold? And the answer was no. So this is just a kind of play to get more money from you at the beginning because you've got wide eyes, you're super ambitious, and you believe you're going to be able to raise a lot of money. You might, but you might not. And there's no actual reason that you need to pay the higher fee when there's no penalty if you raise more than what the threshold is. One of the other reasons why people are sometimes averse to starting nonprofits is because there is more restriction on the way you run your business as a nonprofit than there is on a for-profit. So, for example, I always tell people the biggest difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit is not making money. It's where the money goes once you make it. So that if, for example, my board of directors has approved me to have a salary of $40,000 and I'm the only employee, I'm the only person working, but the organization brings in $500,000. I don't get to just take that $460,000 and put it in my pocket as pay like I could if I was running a for-profit. This is part of the reason why some people, I think, are averse to starting a nonprofit because they don't want to have other people telling them how to spend the money that they raise. But the real reason why you start a nonprofit versus a for-profit is not necessarily a money play. It really is about a doing good play and building something that belongs, that is for the public good, not for your personal good. Doesn't mean you can't personally benefit, but it's not, you didn't create it for you to benefit personally. You created it for you to use it as a vehicle to benefit the larger community. So this goes back to one of our previous episodes when I talked about the kind of structure, the kind of model you're going to use to create your company. Ongoing reporting and filing is another thing that people will often lift up as one of their concerns. But the truth is, if you're doing business in the United States of America, there's going to be ongoing paperwork and filing. Sometimes you hear people of a particular political party talk about the administrative burden for business, small business in America. Well, if you're running a nonprofit in the United States, you're part of that small business community, even though you're a nonprofit business. And so each year you need to submit a 990. A 990 is the taxes of your nonprofit. Now, here's the thing. Again, these threshold questions come up. If you are operating or you secure the creation, all the documents of creating a nonprofit, but you don't raise any money, well, the IRS just requires you to submit a postcard that basically says, we didn't raise any money, but we still do exist. Here's our leadership. Here's our address, but we still exist. And you send in a postcard, literally a postcard. If you raise less than the next economic threshold, there's a form called an EZ, which is, I think, 1 or 2 pages long. It's been a long time since I did an EZ, but it's an easy form because you don't have very complicated financials. You haven't raised very much money. There comes a point where you're doing a full 990, and a full 990 includes a bunch of information. By the time you have enough money for a full 990, you should also be able to afford an accountant to be able to complete that 990 for you because you've raised enough money to be able to do a more detailed report, and you have more detailed financials because you've had an accountant in place to be able to be tracking your expenses and your revenue. One of the newest things, or at least newest to me, was just before COVID, state attorney generals created this new expectation around state charitable solicitation registration, where you're supposed to register your charity in all the states where you're going to be raising money, whether from foundations, corporations, or individuals. Why is this relevant? Well, because I talked earlier about the kind of fees associated with your paperwork for the IRS. Well, because nonprofits don't pay taxes, these are ways that government is able to benefit from your existence in a way that is financially beneficial to them because you have to turn in paperwork and pay a processing fee, and they get some money off of money that you make in their state. You could think of it as a kind of tax. And maybe that sounds really daunting, but there are a number of organizations that exist to be able to help you file in the states where you believe you're going to raise money. Now, if you believe, rightly or wrongly, you're going to raise money in all 50 states, I got good news for you. There are a number of states that don't require any fee or registration, places like Hawaii, Kentucky, Maryland, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, etc. But then the fee structure begins at $10 fees, where you submit paperwork annually and pay a $10 fee in places like Colorado, Florida, Tennessee. Goes up to $15, $20, $25, $30, $35. Now, you're going to need to pay the charitable registration fee in the state where you're forming. So I am fortunate enough to have formed our charity in Washington, D.C. D.C. has the highest state charitable contribution solicitation fee, which is $412.50, which means if you're raising money from people in Washington, D.C., you have to pay $412.50 each year in order to be able to register your charity as a group that can raise money in Washington, D.C. Why is this important? Well, if you begin to raise money around the country and you are not registered as a charity that has the permission to be able to solicit in the states, the fines for states begin around $500, and the highest fine I saw was something like $5,000. Like you could literally raise, X number of dollars in a state, and then that state charge you $5,000 for raising any money in that state. Yes, that is literally crazy. But that's the law. And so this is kind of part of that administrative burden. I'll be honest, I think the thing to do there, again, is pay for the service. The cost for registering to raise money in states around the country is not exorbitant, but the fees, the fines can be. So I would suggest this is just a part of doing business. You got to send $50 to this state and $20 to that state and $15 to that state, and you got to pay someone to do it. But again, it's the cost of doing business and your ability to raise money all over the country. Now, I would not encourage anyone to register in all 50 states unless you know people who you're going to ask to give to you in all 50 states. We're based in Washington, D.C. The overwhelming majority of the money that we raise comes from D.C., from Maryland, and Virginia. Now, do we have some people in California? A couple, a few people in Texas, some people in New York. So registering in those states makes sense. Again, it's not a huge amount of money, but covering the back of the company, this is definitely something that is wise to do. Um, I would suggest that doing just a quick search engine search for a list of the fees for your city, state, and the surrounding. So if most of the people that you know are going to be in the place, the geography immediately surrounding where you're forming your corporation slash nonprofit, you should register in those surrounding states, just out of an abundance of caution and because the money is not crazy. Um, the third category of administrative burden is financial management. And so one of the things that you have to be cognizant is the need for internal controls. You must have separate duties. No one person should handle all the money. I myself am the executive director. I have a CFO and I have a bookkeeper. That each of them monitor the finances, generate reports, support the process of reporting on funding to funders, and contribute information that helps my development staff be able to create things like our annual report where we share our finances. Um, this is especially important as you're growing to not mistakenly or intentionally misuse funds. Tracking your funding is also part of that financial management and oversight. Keep restricted versus unrestricted funds separately. The very best investment you will make as soon as you can afford it is for a bookkeeper. I know that there's lots of ways that you can automate bookkeeping now, depending on the service you want to use. It's also a question of how much money you're going to have. If you don't have very much money, you don't need a ton of systems. I know when I met our bookkeeper, Kelly Matthews, from Matthews Business Associate Services, when she walked into the office for her interview, she was like the third or fourth bookkeeper that I interviewed, and I pulled out my filing system at that time, which was literally a milk crate filled with receipts. And Kelly said, "Huh, looks like we got some work to do." And I've worked with Kelly. We're now a 23-year-old organization. I've worked with Kelly, I believe, for 2 decades, and her team. And I think that getting a good bookkeeper, someone who's going to help ask tough questions, because bookkeepers think about money and tracking money totally different than you do. Trust me. They're going to ask questions. They're going to ask you for that receipt that is $1.15. You're like, you need that receipt for $1. I got a report on it. I need that paperwork. I need that backup. Um, One of the things that Kelly did was help me develop a financial policies and procedures manual that is supposed to detail how it is that we raise money, make money, put money in reserves, etc. So it's like a 15-page document that's really supposed to be about how money is managed in the space. You don't need that right now, but understand you do need to understand the importance of separating duties, and then to understand that there is a difference between restricted and unrestricted funds. And that's going to be especially important because you're most likely going to operate on an accrual basis, which means there's this process by which when you receive money and when you can spend money, that they're not necessarily the same. Talk to your bookkeeper. Even if you decide to use something like QuickBooks has virtual professionals that you can talk to in the early stages. There's nothing wrong with being able to keep your books yourself before you start making enough money to be able to afford somebody, but be working with the intention of being able to offload that work to someone who has greater expertise in it than you do, just because you're going to really appreciate having that level of expertise on your team. Kelly was really one of the first people that worked for WBL that wasn't an artist, um, and probably one of the best hires I ever made, not just from her experience in finance, but also because she worked for lots of other nonprofits. So that sometimes she would bring opportunities that she was aware of just because she worked with other folks and asked, how come we weren't applying for X, Y, and Z? So having someone that's connected in a larger ecosystem benefits you. Audits and reviews are another thing that nonprofits do, um, and they depend on the revenue you get. On one level, it's about how much money you get, but it's also who's giving you money. So, for example, most federal grants above a certain amount of money require an audit because they want to see, did you spend all the money the way that you said you were going to spend it. Uh, Beginning as a small nonprofit, it's unlikely that you're going to go after grants and win awards for things that are necessarily that big in the beginning. You definitely want to have a bookkeeper or a certified public accountant on your staff before you get those kind of grants, because the reporting requirements are immense, and you need a partner in that. Um, you should understand that the thresholds for when an audit or a review varies from state to state. So this is one of the things, while you're waiting for your 501c3 paperwork to come through in that first 6 to 12 months, be studying what are the laws around finance in your city or state, because they're going to make a difference. You're going to want to do things like make sure that you and your board and your CPA, once you hire it, are aware of the kind of thresholds that are going to be indicators of greater scrutiny and greater transparency. Now, you might say, well, Mazi, I really don't want to do all of that reporting. But the reason why the reporting requirements, like why nonprofits regularly do audits versus usually for-profit businesses get audited by the IRS, where the IRS comes in and asks you for all that same paperwork, there's a lot more flexibility in a for-profit business because you're just making profit. You're just making money, as opposed to receiving other people's money to provide a service, expertise, um, and sometimes product. But you're receiving other people's money as a charitable gift to be able to do that, so that you have to, as part of being transparent, be able to show how and where you spent the money. Um, by law, you must provide financials and governing documents to the public if they ask. So that literally means, like, if you're watching this YouTube video and you said, "Hey Mazi, I want to see where's Beats and Lights financials," I would say, sure, they're actually public. Our 990s and the 990 of every single nonprofit is delivered to the IRS, and the IRS gives it to multiple entities that make them public. I usually tell people to go to GuideStar. GuideStar is a platform where you can go and look up the financial records of any nonprofit in the United States that has enough money that they actually needed to submit a 990. I was literally talking to this organization based in Philadelphia the other day. It's brand new. It's 3 years old, and I just wanted to know, like, what do their finances look like? And I went and looked, and I'm super impressed that they're at close to $300,000 3 years into being an entity. Um, so I have a call scheduled with them to learn more about their programming, their dynamic board of directors who are super connected, because all that's on GuideStar, seeing who's on their board, sometimes where those folks work. It's about transparency, seeing who are the people that are contributing to this work that you are witnessing. Um, Part of the reason why I thought this was really important to talk about these three particular areas of the administrative burden, because I was literally talking to a friend who's contemplating creating a nonprofit, and literally she used the words, "But the administrative burden is so much. I'm not sure that I really want to do this." And I started to tell her, like, it's not a lot of things in the grand scheme of the operation of a business. But it's also a matter of thinking about, when you run this thing, when you create it, how big or small is it going to be? Like, I encourage every artist that I know to start a nonprofit. Why? Because there are a bunch of different financial opportunities that arise that are only available to nonprofits. I think about, if I was an artist who was working to just, live off of my craft, I would think about owning a nonprofit or operating a nonprofit the same way I think about a passport. Lots of people in America don't have passports. And that's not really a problem until you need one. So if you thought about all the times that opportunities arise in your city, in your state, that are only available to nonprofits, well, if you have one, even if it doesn't raise or make much money, even if it hasn't done a ton of things, if you have personally been doing a lot of things as your LLC, as your own independent operated business, you can take your expertise as the executive of that nonprofit and put all your expertise over as an asset that the nonprofit has access to, so that you can apply for that grant for 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 that you couldn't apply for if you didn't have a nonprofit. So I just wanted to begin here. I wanted to make this a two-part series because I know it feels like I just talked about a lot of different things, and I did. But the reality is that though it's a list of things, it's a list of knowable, achievable, manageable things. The very first step is the easiest. It is to simply get your EIN, then to get however many people are required to have a board of directors in your articles of incorporation to be able to submit those to your local um, government administration that handles small businesses. Once you turn that in, then the next step is to submit your bylaws to that same entity. It might be a different department. Then after that, to take all of that information and submit it to the IRS along with Form 1020 or 1020 EZ. EZ is the for the folks that are raising less money or project that they're going to raise less money. 1023 is the longer form. Once you've done that, then it's just a matter of knowing what kind of restrictions you're going to face around the money that you raise and how it is that you spend it, and just being cognizant and doing your due diligence around that, knowing that once you, or better, regardless of how much money you raise, you're going to need to submit a 990. There are literally three kinds of 990s: 990N, 990EZ, and the full 990. The N is the equivalent of that postcard I was talking about. The EZ, last time I filled it out, was a one-page sheet that was two-sided. And then the full 990 depends on how much you're reporting on. I know our last 990, I feel like, was like 25 pages long, but it was filled out by my CPA, by my bookkeeper, and reviewed by my CFO and my board of directors, and then turned into the IRS. So that the idea is that the IRS gives you the time to be able to grow into a fuller thing, but they want to know what you're doing with the resources that you get, or if you're getting any resources. Do you still exist? Because lots of people create businesses and then kind of abandon them. So that's where that postcard comes in. Doing your state charitable solicitation registration is important if you're going to be raising money beyond the state that you are going to operate your business in. With the internet, there's always an opportunity for you to generate revenue from someplace other than where you're operating. So you want to look at and pay attention to where most of your contributions are coming from, and register to be able to do charitable solicitations in the states where you're receiving money from. Know every single year you need to, well, this is depending on the state, submitting your state corporate annual report to remain in good standing. In DC, we have to do that every 2 years. It's a 3-page sheet where it asks for an update on who's on my board of directors, how much money we raised, how much money we spent, and a couple of other questions. And then we pay a fee to do that annual report to the city, so they have a sense of what kind of assets we have as a nonprofit. And then work to regularly update to maintain your tax exempt status. Regular updates to maintain tax exempt status. That's making sure that your address, who's in leadership, if the structure has changed, making sure that you're submitting those to the appropriate government entities as a part of this larger set of reports. These are not super extensive reports or very expensive. I think the cost for all the things I've talked to up to this point is literally no more than $1,000. $1,000 to be able to run a business where your first grant could be $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 is money and time well worth spending. You are worth that. And then I talked about the financial management. As you grow, the people that give you money are going to want to know that you have the appropriate structures in place in order to track and report and monitor the resources that you're given. Because again, a nonprofit, unlike a for-profit, they're not giving you money. They're giving money to this public nonprofit. I don't actually own Words Beats in Life. No one owns a nonprofit. They're managed by executive directors. They're governed by boards of directors, but they're officially owned, I guess you would say, by the American people. That this is one of the assets of the nation. And so the resources that you're able to accumulate don't belong to you or me. They belong to the people of the places where we form these entities. Being clear about the requirements for tracking restricted versus unrestricted, definitely get a CPA, or definitely use whichever financial tracking service you want to use, whether that's QuickBooks or something else. Make sure you use the virtual assistants that they provide so that you're doing all your due diligence and managing the resources that you're given access to. Um, be prepared to request an independent audit. So it is required once you reach a particular threshold, uh, whether that's $500,000 or $750,000 or $1 million. It's depending on when you're seeing this video as to which number you're required to complete an audit and submit it to the IRS so that they have a record of the review of your finances. But at the same time that I mention all this, these levels of transparency and due diligence and documentation make you a more appealing charity to the people that could donate to you. One of the things, I guess maybe a gift and a curse of the nonprofit sector is sometimes people say they want to give all their money to the mission, not to the people. And by that, they usually mean giving money to programming, not to staff. Part of our responsibility as stewards of these organizations is to make the case for why the organization is also important and needs the resources that it needs to be able to attract and retain the talent that's necessary, to be able to afford access to the most up-to-date equipment if you're training people as a pre-vocational program. That you have to make the case for why people are investing in the entity and in the programming and in the people that do it. All right. So hopefully this will be the most boring of all of the well, one of two of the most boring. But this is episode 8. I said if I make it to episode 10, I think I got something. Personally, I'm really enjoying joining you every week. Sorry I was a little late today, but hopefully this information, especially for those of you that are contemplating starting a nonprofit, everything I said around the formation and legal compliance, you could literally do in the time it took you to watch this video. It's super quick, especially knowing how you have access to examples of each of the things on the internet. The ongoing reporting might sound burdensome, but for the most part, you're going to outsource that to people as you get bigger because the levels of reporting when you start are very low versus once you get bigger, they become much higher. But by that time, you can afford to hire professionals to help you with that. And then the financial management and oversight is just about building a strong house that people can continue to invest in and count on to be there as time passes. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join me today here on Wednesday Wisdom with yours truly, Mazi Mustafa. Catch you next week. Peace.